in 4 seconds. Exactly. Good. So as I promised you this evening, there's going to be a bit of light relief.
Good.
Rather than reading more of the Guide for the Perplexed and beginning the topic of prophecy, which is another very profound topic, I want to continue the theme of the eternity of the universe, not in the same theological, physical terms that Rambam was dealing with, but I want to have a look at some of our rabbinical commentators who I think exemplify Maimonides' approach to, albeit a much more physical aspect of wisdom. In other words, I'm looking at natural phenomena. We'll begin with a rainbow and Ramban. Now I'm going to go into share screen mode. Would everybody please mute? And here we are. And Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, who is often regarded as the antithesis of Maimonides. Maimonides, the Aristotelian influenced rationalist. Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, one of the first commentators to introduce the Zohar into his commentary on the Torah, somebody much closer to the mystical roots of Judaism, a great Bible commentator, great Talmudist, great halachist, essay writer, but also a physician. So he was also a man of science in that sense. So let's see what he does with a rainbow. I'm going to read from line 3. Pasuk in Bereshit Parashat Noach. Zotot habrit asher ani noten. God tells Noach after the flood that this is the sign of the promise that I am going to put in the sky to manifest my decision never to send such a drastic punishment to the earth again as the flood. This implies that at the time of creation, there was no rainbow because the rainbow is appearing now. Now is after the flood. And God has created a fresh phenomenon in the universe. כקשת לא עשהו שיהיו רגליו למעלה, שיראה כאילו מן השמיים מורים בו. וישלח חיציו ויפיצי בארץ, אבל עשהו בהפך מזה, להראות שלא יורו בו מן השמיים. Ramban now gives us a pictorial explanation of the rainbow. The rainbow faces away from the earth. In fact, if you were to aim a bow at the earth, it would be in the wrong direction. So the bow, in fact, is aimed at heaven. Ramban notices this, and then he gives us an instance of his knowledge of comparative native anthropology, or the anthropology of war. וכן דרך הנלחמים להפוך אותו בידם, ככה כאשר יקראו לשלום למי שכנגדם. Old ancient tribes did exactly this. You want to show that your intentions are peaceful, you reverse your bow and you point it at yourself. So clearly your intentions are not violent. Wonderful. V'od, Jena keshet yated, actually it should be l'chonin chitzim alav. There's no string in the bow. You couldn't even use it to shoot an arrow. So Ramban here is very descriptive, gives us a nice idea about the rainbow. This is God's sign of appeasement. Yoshua, I will of course pick on you because I want you to pay careful attention. Line 7. V'anachnu, and we. Al korchenu means perforce, against our will. Na'amin, we have to believe l'divrei hayavanim. The words of the Greek scientists. Shemilat hashemesh ba'avir halach yiyeh keshet b'tolada. Rainbow is the result of light, okay, in damp air. It's what we call refraction. And now the Ramban says you can do it at home. Ki b'chli hamayim lefnei hashemesh, take a little pan, put water in it, make sure it's glass, hold it up to the light, and you'll see Kamaria Keshet. You'll see the colors of the rainbow. Refraction of light. Now, Ramban could say, wow, I have a terrible conflict here. On the one hand, the Torah is giving us a wonderful sign, and it's locating it in time after the flood and not before. And yet, my reason, my physical science, the Yevanim, the Greeks, they tell me that in fact it's a natural phenomenon. So it must have been part of the laws of nature when the world was created. So is this a threat to my faith? Not at all, says Ramban. In fact, following Maimonides' approach, he says, if I read the Torah correctly, I have no problem. Ki amar et kashti natati be'anan. It said, I put my bow in the sky in the past tense. I already put it in the sky. V'lo amar ani noten. It doesn't use the present tense. I'm putting it in now. Kasher amar zot haot habrit asher ani noten. Umilat kashti. So the Brit is the thing that's happening now. The Keshet always was. So we've reconciled in a nice Maimonidean way, and Ramban, of course, lived a generation after Maimonides, and he definitely knew about his writings, including the Moreh Nevukhim, because he cites it in his commentary, often to criticize it. But Ramban does exactly the same thing. He says, I have a wonderful theological enterprise called the rainbow. I have a scientific law that says it must have been possible to have rainbows from the creation onwards, and I solve any contradiction by interpreting the Torah. I look at the word natati, past tense, for the keshet. I look at the noten, present tense, for the Brit, and now I understand. And now Ramban says it black on white. Umilat kashti, line 10, Moreh shaita lo akeshet techila. The word about kashti natati tells us that the keshet, the rainbow, was in place on the day of creation. V'lachen nefaresh hakatuv hakeshet asher natati be'anan miyom habriya. Rainbow that I put in the sky, says God, from the very beginning, because I work according to natural laws of physics, chemistry, biology. But from this day onwards, it takes on a fresh significance. It now comes to mean ot brit beini uveinechem. But God did not create the rainbow anew after the flood. He always had it there. He says, I'm now going to give the rainbow a new theological significance for the Jewish people, for the people of the Bible. It's now a sign between me and you. Shekozman she'erena askir ki briti shalom beini uveinechem. I'll recall my covenant of peace between you and me. So here we have, I think, an illustration of what I said last time, that Rambam paved the way for rabbinical thinkers to reconcile science, physics, perhaps metaphysics, with Jewish tradition, especially the text of the Torah, by compromising via interpretation. Are there any questions on the Ramban? Unmute or forever hold your peace. If you want to speak to me, you have to unmute, Yoshua. Unmute. Otherwise,
I have a quick comment.
Ramban
Okay.
doesn't compromise. The Ramban says very simple pshat in the pasuk. He doesn't change the meaning, the simple meaning of the pasuk. That's very much contrast to the Rambam, who changes very often the simple meaning of the pasuk.
Well, simple. Sometimes he does things which are less simple, sometimes more simple, but it is the same methodology, basically. He reads the pasuk. Now we have both noten and natati. So Ramban has to finesse that. Okay, but we will move on. I do take the point, as everybody does. Someone else wanted to speak. Was that you, Jean?
Yeah.
Good.
No, it's Harvey.
Harvey from
Yes,
Canada.
yes, from Canada. So the quick comment, some of them might interpret that verse about the rainbow being not a sign for us, but a sign for God. And doesn't that kind of help reinforce this idea that, well, I created this rainbow, and it's going to be the reminder to me, God, that I'm not going to do whatever I've done in the past.
I'm not sure about that, Harvey, but I can support you because there is a Mishnah in Psachim that says that the Keshet was one of the things that God created at the period between day and night on the first Friday. Okay, the dusk, Bein Hashmashot. So he had this idea that the rainbow would have a significance in future time. So in that sense, we can make a bridge between, again, another bridge between the text of the Torah and physical science, and we can say that God's intention was then that there would be a flood, and he would then make a rainbow, which of course would go to God's omniscience, that he knows exactly what is going to happen. There's a whole list of things, and we're going to talk about miracles after we've discussed prophecy. List of things in this Mishnah which we regard as miracles. For example, the earth's opening and swallowing up Korach and his congregation, or the great well that accompanied Bnei Israel, or, as I hear on my left, the talking ass, okay, Bilam and his Aton. So they're, again, a compromise. Half part of the laws of nature, but very rare phenomena which kick into action, as it were, later on. We'll talk about that when we get to miracles. Let's read Malbim, source number 2 on 913. Malbim, Rabbi Meir Leibush ben Yechiel Michal, his name was actually Wieser, born in 1809, beginning of the 19th century, and he died in 1879. Very interesting. Malbim was highly respected by the traditional Orthodox rabbinical rabbinate, but also by the emerging maskilim, the Jews who were looking to entrench themselves in a general world of culture, intellect, and something that may not have been always quite kosher from a theological perspective, because he wrote an amazing commentary on Tanakh. Now, Malbim developed this amazingly unique approach to the interpretation of the Torah. Is it pshat or is it not is a different question, but it's certainly an amazing one, very unique. And I'm going to leave, though, the linguistic side of the Malbim, but just I'm going to add and say that all his life, and he had numerous rabbinical posts, he was pursued by the problem of the early modern Orthodox rabbi. On the one hand, he wasn't quite frum enough for the fanatics. And on the other hand, he wasn't quite progressive enough for the progressives. So I think it's a common phenomenon of Orthodox rabbis in the modern era. And if you were to ask me, for example, associated with Switzerland, whose name would I utter? Associated with Switzerland, the second part of his life, whose name? Which posek found himself caught between modernity and the yeshiva world? Rabbi Weinberg, the Tzvili, of course. Yeah. Okay, always bedeviled. In fact, when his Oren, his coffin, came to Jerusalem, his adherents wanted to bury him in the Chelkat HaRabbanim, where the great rabbinical authorities were buried. And a whole group of yeshiva bochrim said no. Weinberg was into secular studies. He had a doctorate, or he claimed he had a doctorate. He certainly wrote semi-academic stuff. What happened? The funeral cortege stopped. Nothing was happening. Somebody sent a message to the Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron, Rabbi Cheskel Sarna. The Oren of the Srediash is here, and the Kanaim are not letting him be buried. Cheskel Sarna, who is an ill man at the time, gets out of his sick bed, puts on a dressing gown, gets a taxi, goes to the Chelkat HaRabbanim, tells off the Kanaim, and Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg is buried where he ought to be buried. But this is the dilemma of Orthodox rabbis. So what do? They follow Maimonides. Let's have a look at the age of the universe. Vayimach et kol hayekum asher pnei adama, me'adam ad behema ad remes v'ad of hashamayim vayimachu min haaretz. Think it is Vayimach, correct? Michael Gillis? Correct. Good. Now, what is limchot? To wipe out entirely. This is again Noah the flood. God destroys entirely everything that existed on the face of the earth. Okay, not the birds. Man to beast, until crawling thing. And then birds that couldn't fly high enough. And they were absolutely obliterated from the earth. Now, Malbim says, I know that many bones have remained in the earth. And they weren't obliterated. But they weren't seen on the surface of the earth. Because the carcasses of the animals that lived on the earth at Noah's time, okay, were washed away. And those that weren't were buried deep into the recesses of the earth. Thousands of cubits down into the center of the earth went these bones of the big animals. And we know what they are, dinosaurs. עד שבצאת נוח מן התיבה לא מצא שום רושם מפגרי בעלי חיים ועצמות הענקים ובעלי חיים הגדולים, the dinosaurs, the giant beasts, שהיו קודם המבול, that did populate the earth before the flood. ועדות השם נאמנה כמעט פתי. But God's word is always the last item in wisdom. להשיב דבר לחוכמי what's the next word?
Geologia.
Geologia, the geologists. Now, in the 19th century, the great period of geology, okay, early 19th century, people are digging into the earth and discovering what? Fossils, remains, fossil remains of dinosaurs. Paleontology, okay, what is paleas in ancient Greek? Old. And of course, onto is a creature. And logy is study, the study of ancient creatures. Paleontology is all the rage. After the flood, there are no more dinosaurs. Now, they work out the age of the universe on the basis of these fossils. Each level in the earth containing fossils can be dated to a separate period. And they work with this assumption. The world is millions of years old because it takes so long for a level of earth to be created, and we see different life forms and fossils in each one, so we can work out how long it takes for each of these levels of, if you like, levels of earth to be formed, and therefore we date the world back millions of years. And our 5,784 is up the creek without a paddle. But all this, says the Malbim, is utter rubbish. Its mouth, animal mouth, loa. Halitehu לרשע, הליטהו, על ידי הרעשים שבאו מעומק שאול ותום רבה, והפכה תחתונים למעלה ועליונים למטה. Everything was in chaos at the time of the flood, and so you'll find fossil remains at different levels underneath the surface of the earth, And you can't prove a thing because you cannot use today's measurements to deal with the cataclysmic, chaotical period of the flood. Remember, Rambam said the same thing about the eternity of the universe, that the Aristotelians prove the eternity of the universe because of what of today's science, whereas it is different. The past is not necessarily what happened today. This is a static view of geological developments. ונבקה חוכמת הדרושים והחופרים לדעת איכות המהפכה הזאת אשר עשתה פלאות במשך ק"ן יום של עמידת המים. All of the geological calculations neglect the 150 days of absolute chaos and turmoil of the flood. What does the word navka mean? Yeshayahu Yutet Gimel V'navka ruach Mitzrayim bekirban, to become empty. Navka is onomatopoeic. It's like bak, bakbuk, glug, glug, becomes empty. Anyhow, the emptying of a bottle, it's an onomatopoeic word. Whatever. So they're all making a mistake. עד שכל ההסדרים שסידרו לעמו החוקרים מאיכות אדמה בכל שטח וכל חשבונותיהם בזה נתבלבלו אז וכל השערותיהם ודמיונותיהם יישא רוח. So all of their calculations are completely misjudged. ולו חכמו ישכילו זאת ויראו מעשה השם ונפלאותיו ומצורת שאול איך מחה את כל היקום. That's the emphasis of the word vayimach. Now, Yoshua, is that a pshat? Is that not a pshat? Was the Torah thinking about the dinosaurs? I leave it to you, okay? But the boundaries of pshat are much more flexible. So, Malbim deals with the science of his time. He doesn't deny that there are fossils. I remember being told as a boy in Yesodi HaTorah in Stamford Hill, the fossils are a nisoyon. God is testing us. He, as it were, created these fossils to lead us astray and to test our faith and to see if we would remain strong. Since then, I learned a little bit more. But is this one approach? It certainly is. I think that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was also very keen on this view, that all geological calculations are out of kilter because they don't take into account the cataclysm of the flood. But of course, as a scientist, one could say something else. Are there any geologists in the audience? Well, then I will have to be your geologist for the evening. But we have now, in 1907, radioactive decay was invented as a way of measuring the age of the universe. That uses isotopes, and it's kind of fairly precise. And it still gives us about 15 billion years. We do not find a layer, which we would expect to at the time of the flood, of mixed bones and fossils of different dinosaurs, forms of life. Everything still seems to be very, very fixed and orderly. So that's a bit of a problem. By the way, Yoshua, your other hero, Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, wrote about this, and he said that we expect orderliness in the world, not chaos. So he was prepared to accept the evidence of the geologists. Now, there's also something called dendrochronology. Anybody know what a dendrochronology is? What's dendros in ancient Greek? Tree.
It's a tree.
Exactly. Rings of trees. We can measure going back thousands of years when it comes to trees. And they do not agree with the Malbim. Finally, we have verve. Verve analysis, it's a Swedish method, but it deals with layers of sediment, glacial lake sediments. There are a lot of frozen lakes in Sweden. Whatever it is, I would take the Malbim and the Lubavitcher Rebbe with all great respect with a grain of salt. But it does show you, one, taking science seriously, B, looking at the Torah to interpret. Now let's read the most amazing document by an amazing Rabbi Yisrael Lifshitz, who wrote the Tiferet Yisrael on the Mishnah. Now, Rabbi Lifshitz, 19th century, 1782 to 1860, famous as the rabbi of Danzig, an amazingly open-minded and curious person who combined great Talmudic and halachic knowledge with absolute unending curiosity as to science, geology, archaeology, comparative religion, you name it, it's in the Tiferet Yisrael. So Tiferet Yisrael bases itself upon a midrash. Amar Rabbi Yehuda bar Simon, Yehi Erev en ketiv kan, Ela vayhi Erev. Back to Bereshit. It doesn't say let there be evening and let there be morning. It says and there was evening and there was morning in the past tense. Mikan she'aseder zmanim kodim lechem. From which we can learn that the evening and the morning were actually in existence before the creation of the world in Bereshit, or an account of it. Amar Rabbi Abau Malamed Shaya Borei Olamot Machrivan. Famous Midrash Rabbi. God actually created many worlds, and then he destroyed them. Ad shebara et elu, until he created ours. Amar Daim Henyanli. This one I like. Yithon lo Henyanli. The others I didn't like, so I destroyed them. So we have perhaps a limitless number of worlds, and therefore a limitless time before the creation, before we begin to count 5,784. Now let's see what the Tiferet Yisrael wrote. This is from an essay he wrote called Drush or Hachayim. It's at the end of the Seder Nezikim. And Tiferet Yisrael, like almost gratuitously, puts in these amazing things that are tangential to his halakhic commentary on the Mishnah, but are fascinating. Daharuach hamishtoket sheba'adam legalot kol ha'olamot. This is beautiful. He says, we all, as human beings, are driven to discover everything that we can about our world. So what did we do? And he includes non-Jews too. I'll tell you about his attitude to non-Jews soon, if we have time. We have begun like moles to excavate the earth. Bikirbayim shel ha'adama, into the bowels of the world. Beharim hayoter gevohim sheba'olam, the highest mountains in the world. Baharei. Now, would anybody like to decode the Yiddish, please?
Pyrenees.
The Pyrenees, where are they? Between Spain and France. And the next lot?
Carpathian Mountains.
And the Carpathians over Karpatische. And what's the next word, Michael?
Gebirge.
Which means?
Bergen, mountains.
Mountains. Gebirge, the mountains, Berg. Okay, so the Carpathians. Carpathians are not the Alps. They're a long way away. Over Hare. What's the next one? Over Hare.
Cordilleros. The Cordilleros.
And where are the Cordilleros, Michael?
America.
In Central America, Mexico. Very good. Wow. Over Hare.
Himalayas.
Himalaya. Bigvul.
China.
China. Chafru v'chatru matzu. Toch ovi adama dalet starim v'chol achat lamala mechaverta. Now he knows his geology. 4 layers. Kol echad min adama acheret. Each one is entirely different in its composition. Uven seder leseder mulachim bruim. And there are creatures, fossils of creatures in each level. Shit kashu v'nithavu b'toaram le'even asher nisham ochiku. Sharetz ne'efcha v'nechlefa panea. We have creatures from different eras, and their shapes and sizes are preserved in stone. The Taf Zayin Lemisparam. I'll tell you what that is. In 1807, Bimedinat B'medinat, line 35, third word.
Deal.
Come on.
Siberia.
Siberia, exactly.
Siberia.
Zibirin. בקצה צפון של העולם תחת הקרח הנורא, אשר שם תמיד under that constant ice. פיל אחד גדול מאוד, a big elephant, וכמו ג' או ד' פעמים מאשר מצאנו עתה. 3 or 4 times as big as our elephants. ושופי עצמותיו עתה עומדים
Italienischen Museum.
בצלנישן Museum בפטרסבורג. In the Selenition is actually of the Tsar. In the Tsarist Museum in St. Petersburg, a mammoth. וכך כל כך ימצאו במעמקי הערים הגבוהים בארץ, חיות הים אשר נתקעו והיו לבן. He knows about marine animals whose fossils are preserved in the earth. וחכם אחד חוקר טבעי, who is the father of modern paleontology. I'll give you a clue. Il est français. Qui est le père de sciences de paléontologie? Baron Georges Cuvier. So,
Cuvier.
Israel, correct? Jean knows about Cuvier as well.
Yes,
All
but
right.
he doesn't transliterate correctly.
Believe me, for a Polish rabbi of his time, I think he's doing amazingly well. Magnifique, הייתי אומר, okay? Now, let's see. כתב שמכל עין חטא מיני חיות שנמצאו בתחתיות הארץ, יש מ"ח מינים שאינם נמצאים כלל בעולם האיטי. Half of the animals that we find in fossil form are no longer existing. וכבר ידענו מעצמות חיה ענקי אחת, שנמצאת במעמקי ארץ סביב עיר, which city? We
Baltimore.
found the fossil in Baltimore,
Baltimore.
America. אשר אורכה י"ז רגל, is 17 feet long, וגבוהה מכפות רגליה הראשונים על קצת כתפותיה י"א רגל, 11 feet in height, ומכף רגליה האחרונים עד גובה יש ט' רגל, 9 feet on the bottom half, וגם באירופה got you on this one, Northern Germany, Harzgebirge. The Harz Mountains in northern Germany. Correct, Michael Rosenfeld?
Correct. Yeah, good.
Yeah. נמצא במעמקי ארץ עצמות זאת החיה, פזורים אחת הנה ואחת הנה, bones all over the place, וקראו בשם לכל מין חיה כזאת. Mammoth. Exactly, mammoth. כן מצאנו מין בריאה אבנית. We found a fossil, שקראו
Iguanodon.
Iguanodon. Okay, and what does iguanodon mean? It's Greek, of course. Don is tooth, and iguana is a lizard, lizard tooth. The teeth are very important in the fossils. Shegova 76 feet. Its width is 90 feet. ומתוך תכונת איברה שפטו התוכניים שמאכלה רק חציר היה. But a herbivore only ate plants. ועוד מין חיה אחרת מצאו שקראוה
Megalosaurus.
Megalosaurus, okay, which just means the big one, the big dinosaur, okay, saurus, megalo is big, okay. Actually, a saurus is a reptile. Yeah. A reptile, that's where you get dinosaur and saurosaur and all of those things, okay. שהייתה רק מעט קטן than the iguanodon, אבל הייתה חיה טורפת, but that was a carnivore and ate flesh. ואוכלת בשר, מכל האמור נראה ברור. Rabbi Lifshitz says from all of this, which I believe without any problem is very clear, שכל מה שמסרו לנו המקובלים זה כמו מאות שנים. We have our מקובלים במדרש, הקדוש ברוך הוא היה בונה עולמות ומחריבן. God made worlds and destroyed them. שכבר היה עולם פעם אחת, ושוב נחרב. There was a world that was destroyed. וחזר ונתקומם. זה 4 פעמים, at least 4 times, we've had universes that have existed. ושבכל פעם העולם התגלה בשלמות יתרה יותר מבתחילה. And each time we evolved to something more perfect. הכל התברר עכשיו בזמננו באמת וצדק. Now, Rabbi Lifshitz goes further. He says science helps us. understand Kabbalah, our Midrash, and it gives us confidence that we are on our way to a better world, because the physical evolution shows that we are going in the right direction. Now, Rabbi Israel Lifshitz got into a bit of trouble because this was not quite what his colleagues, especially in the Hungarian rabbinate, wanted to hear. Okay? They did not want to hear. They wanted to hear what my teacher in Yesodei HaTorah said. The fossils, if they do exist, are in Nisoyan. They're a test. Of course, God is just testing us to see whether we will leave 5,884 and go into the fantasies of the rationalists and the scientists. But he persisted. He wrote other things too. For example, he wrote in Masechet Avot. I think it's worthwhile doing this. There's a line in the Gemara, it's repeated twice in Yevamot and elsewhere, that it says, Adam ki amut ba'ohel. All right, in relation to the tumah, the impurity of a tent. It's about the para aduma. Now, Chazal derive that Adam is only a Jew. In other words, tumat ohel. If I go into an enclosed area and there's a corpse there, I'll become tameh, especially important for a kohen. Even if I don't touch the corpse. That's a halacha. But Chazal say it's only a Jewish corpse, and they say that Atem kruyim Adam, you Jews are called Adam, but Goyim are not called Adam. A line that the Catholic Church used time and time again to charge the Talmud with anti-Goyism, okay? Anti-Gentilism. They said, you Jews believe that we are not even human beings, okay? Atem kruyim Adam, ve'akum einam kruyim Adam. What it means is that if you touch a non-Jewish corpse, there may be tum'ah midrabanan, but certainly no tumat ohel. Rabbi Lifshitz was quite perturbed with this, and he wrote an essay which he attached to Masechet Avot Perek Gimel, Mishnah Yud Daled, and he has this amazing interpretation. He says, why are we called Adam and non-Jews not called Adam? Because we are descendants of Adam. Adam was given the law by God, law of Da Ula Shomra. So we were able to be good people because we had a tradition. But non-Jews are not direct descendants of Adam. God didn't speak to their ancestors as he did to ours. And he says that if they are a good goy, they have to make a tremendous effort, much more than we do. And therefore, that line, Atem kruyim Adam, ve'akum einam kruyim Adam, simply means to say that when you have a righteous Gentile, he or she has had to work much harder to get to be righteous than us. So there we are. Interesting. He also went a little beyond the pale when the end of Masechet Kiddushin says, Tov sheberofim legehinom. He has a long excursus, and he cites a story about Moshe Rabbeinu and an artist and a physiognomist, the brunt of which is that Moshe was really somebody who by nature wasn't that good, but had to work hard on himself. This, of course, contradicts the elitist rabbinic view, which is that Moshe Rabbeinu was born perfect, Vatero Tokitovhu, and therefore there's no question he was the most perfect being ever from birth. So the Tiferet Israel, did go off the tangent, but he clearly believes in a lot of things that very modern Jews would be very keen on, accepting science, respecting non-Jews, believing that people can start off not perfect, but can make themselves into much better people. And all of this was a little edgy. Now, I'm going to go to Munkach, which is, of course, the exact opposite. Rabbi Chaim Elazar Shapir of Munkach, the famous Munkach Rov, was a great Talmid Chacham. But he is famous as being anti-Zionist, anti-rationalist, anti-Aguda. When the Aguda was founded, the Munkacher Rov decided he was going to, or Rebbe actually, because there was a Hasidus involved, he decided that he was going to set up an opposing rabbinical group to Aguda. What was wrong with Aguda? The Gerer Rebbe who was in Aguda was prepared to do two things that the Munkacher believed were catastrophic. Number one, to teach secular subjects in school, and number two, to support Beis Yankov, Bet Yaakov, okay, Sarah Shenira, the whole movement to make girls' education. The Gerer Rebbe gave it, Aguda gave it support. So the Munkacher withdrew and he blasted the Belzer Rebbe and the Gerer Rebbe. He wasn't scared of anyone. Unfortunately, I have to admit to perhaps a little dark side of the Haredi temperament. He got in trouble with the authorities twice. Once he was found guilty of tax evasion to the tune of 100,000 krona, but his Hasidim paid the back tax. And number two, in order to be recognized as the official rabbi of Munkach, he had to prove that he knew Hungarian. So he forged a certificate that he finished high school with the Hungarian proficiency exam. He was discovered, and the interesting thing is that he took time off, he learned Hungarian, he actually passed the exam, but he thought, this was his approach, not quite the approach of the Baal Tiferet Israel. So I am citing a section from his Tshuvot, the Minchas Elozor, okay, and he died in 1937, okay, and his influence was most significant for Reb Yoel Teitelbaum, the Satmar Rebbe, who follows exactly in the path of the Munkacher, rabid, anti-Zionist, anti-change, anti-anything that's going to perhaps give some credence to something that's associated with modernity. But this is a cute passage in the Shutim, which I got to for a totally different issue, to do with Masechet Yadayim and Basan Cherivu Bilbelet Almot. Uma shekatav, line 6, Kavod Malato, B'Shem HaTiferet Yisrael, Sham B'Matnitin Yadayim. Now, the Tiferet Yisrael has a pilpul about a Mishnah in Masechet Yadayim, Perek Dalet, a great Mishnah, okay? Ad kan Lushono. So a rabbi wrote a question to the Munkacher asking him about the Tiferet Yisrael's understanding of a Mishnah. Ad kan Lushono she'evi mimenu. Now, the questioner wants the Munkacher to explain the Tiferet Yisrael to him. V'nasefet Tiferet Yisrael al Mishnayot tachat yadi. So the Munkacher says, I don't have this book in my home. Ki husar mi beitenu be'et sh'ra'inu drush kra'o orach chaim. When I read this drush orach chaim at the end of Nizikin about the dinosaurs, שנתפס שם ממנו בסוף נזיקין, ויש בו דעות נפסדות נוטות למינות, and I saw כפירה, heresy there, רחמנא ליצלן, heaven forfend, בעניין חידוש העולם, about the age of the universe, ועולמה, so it's not in my home. I wouldn't have such a book in my home. ועולמה חבר now actually says something which is a very typical move. When you have somebody who really disagrees with an ideological move made by a very widely accepted and highly respected halachic authority, whose orthodoxy is not impugned, what you say is that the offending passage was a forgery not written by him. Ziyuf, okay, we see it all over in modern poskim as well, okay. Olay machaber naki. It could be that Rabbi Yisrael Lifshitz is fine. Ki mufursam hayal adam gadol v'kasher. He was a great kosher guy. Uveno ziyef bishmo. But his son forged this and passed it off as his name. Now his son was Baruch Yitzchak Lifshitz, who actually published the Tiferet Yisrael 4 years or so after his father died, with a commentary of his. But Rabbi Baruch Yitzchak Lifshitz was very orthodox. He was very close to Rabbi Akiva Eger. There was an issue with him being a rabbi when he was a bocher. And Akiva Eger said, no, I don't think this is the right thing, but eventually got his rabbinical position. You see his picture, he's got a long beard, a big kapaluch, he's got a kaftan. I mean, this is, and when he was pressed about his father's drush or Orach Chaim and asked later on, after he published the first edition, to take it out, he said, certainly not. This is what my father wrote. So this is the sort of thing that happens, okay? Uvnozi, but the Mukacher says, of course, the son forged it. Al kol panim sham nimsu advarim zarim umarim. Al kain eino itanu. I don't have the book Tiferet Yisrael, but I've got to answer your question. Rakim nitztarech lirot bo bi'itim rechokim binyan halacha. So when I need the halachic aspect of the Tiferet Yisrael, nishlach acharav l'shoalo ulahachliro. I send somebody to borrow it from somebody who has it. I read it, the relevant passage, and then as soon as I finish, I send it out of my house so it should not be contaminated by the minus and the kfirah in the Tiferet Yisrael. Okay. Yes, Yo, speak.
What I read the Drush Orach Chaim more in detail, and I don't see exactly what is the Divrei Minut to which he refers.
The very existence of a dinosaur, the very existence of different levels, and the fact that the earth could be a lot older than Taf Shin Pei Daled is kfira. Where are you living? Not in Gula or Bnei Brak.
There is a weak point in the theory of the Tiferet Israel, because
Okay, good.
he considers that there was one creation ex nihilo, and then 4 times anything was wiped out, but it was not more ex nihilo. But the difficulty is that, according to him, old fossils were a first prototype, and then he begins again from nothing. The continuity disappears in his explanation.
Quarter of an hour.
I'm not sure my reading again of Drush Orach Chaim is that he is that sharp. In other words, he is saying that we find the 4 different levels with 4 different types of creatures, not only dinosaurs, but other creatures too. But you're quite right. The first creation was ex nihilo. I don't think that Tiferet Yisrael would even begin to argue about that. He wasn't an Aristotelian, but he would say that we would expect to find the remnants of different worlds, but he doesn't say that it was a sharp difference. It could have been a very gradual one. And I think the words also support that, because he talks about the fact that what we are doing is that each time we are improving. So improving on existing creatures as well. They become better. Dinosaurs become more developed. They have longer necks. They can reach higher into trees. I think you can read the Tiferet Yisrael a little more generously than you have just now. Okay? But in any case, the fine point here is that Tiferet Yisrael has no problem at all, and he uses the Midrash Rabbah and Kabbalah. Now, what Kabbalah does he use? Because if you do accept mammoths, dinosaurs, and geological evaluation of the strata of the earth, you are going into thousands, if not millions of years. And how do you reconcile that with Tashbag? Now let's move on to a little bit of Kabbalah and Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. Okay, very interesting. Aryeh Moshe Elio Kaplan, actually Lenny, as a wild boy growing up in the Bronx. Amar Rav Katina, this is the Gemara. Shit alfei shani hava alma v'chad charuv. Okay, world is 6,000 years. 1 year, it was tohu vavohu. 1,000 years, okay, it was a mess. All right. Now, Sefer HaTmuna is an interesting book. Sefer HaTmuna is one of the early Kabbalistic books, like Sefer HaBahir, and actually it is attributed to Rabbi Nevukhim ben Hakana. Now, Rabbi Nevukhim ben Hakana who does all sorts of things with Ana Bekoach, and Rabbi Yishmael were regarded as mystical Kabbalistic Tanaim. I don't have time to give a mini shiur on Kabbalah. I'm not going to do that, okay? But many books are attributed to Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana. I don't think that there's any historical validity in that at all. Sefer HaTmuna, though, is quoted by the Rishonim because it deals with halachic issues as well, but it does talk about the fact that Kula Shani Halalu Shmitin Hen. Any year we talk about in terms of the age of the universe has to be multiplied by 7 because they're all Shmitim. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak Demin Akko lived very interesting. He was a Kabbalist, a Talmid Chaver of the Ramban, 1250 to 1340. He lived in Akko. There was a great yeshiva in Akko. Remember, Rabbi Chil of Paris brought 300 students to Akko. When the Mamluk Turks occupied this part of the world, they destroyed Akko entirely, Jewish Akko. But he actually survived. He was a prisoner. He was ransomed in Egypt, Rabbi Yitzchak Demin Akko, and he went off to Italy to discover who actually wrote the Zohar. Now, we didn't know about the Zohar before the 13th century when Rabbi Moshe di Leon provided us with the first copy of the Zohar. Zohar is attributed to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Rabbi Yitzchak Demin Akko went to see the widow of Rabbi Moshe di Leon and asked her whether he actually wrote it by himself or he had a manuscript of Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, that he copied. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak Demin Akko is a great Kabbalist, goes back and forth. Eventually, he comes down on the side of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, but he does entertain a view that a whole group of Kabbalists got together in the 13th century and they put together all these texts. And it was, if you like, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Farteicht und Farbeset. So you can take your pick, okay? Or you can go with Gershom Sholem and others who say that this was Rabbi Moshe di Leon, but I don't have time to go into that either. But Rabbi Yitzchak Min Akko says, Ani HaKatan, Ra'iti nachon lichtov sod gadol, shekol yom hu 1000 shana b'nei Hashem. And every year would be 1,000 years, because that's what the psalmist says about the year in God's eyes. So Shnat Kutsha Berechu hu 365,250 human years. And now I want to read Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. Aryeh Kaplan was an amazing fellow. He actually was born to a descendant of the famous Sephardic Rekanati family. And he was a wild kid, Len from the Bronx. His mother died when he was 13. And somebody said, Len, go and say Kaddish. He went into a shul. And there was a Klausenberger Chossid whose son, Chanoich, saw this boy saying Kaddish or trying to say Kaddish, no tefillin, no siddur. So he befriended him. And eventually, Len goes to Torah Vadas at the age of 15. And he becomes a leading student, an absolute Ilui. At the age, he does a little bit in Reb Simcha Wasserman's yeshiva in LA. He goes to Mir. He learns, he gets Smicha, Yoreh from Rabbi Dr. Yitzchak Isaac Herzog, and Yadin from Eliezer Yehuda Finkel, the Rosh Yeshiva of Mir. Then he goes back to the States and he studies physics in Louisville, and he marries Toby Goldstein, has 9 kids, gets a Master of Science from Maryland University, and he becomes a research scientist. And in the who's who of that year, he's one of the most promising young scientists in the United States. He was hired at the National Bureau of Standards Fluid Mechanics Division. He was in charge of mega hydrodynamics research, and he got a National Science Foundation Fellow through the fall semester of 1964. most promising young physicists in the States. 1965, a year after his fellowship, he leaves it all and becomes a rabbi. In all sorts of weird and odd communities, he wanders around the place a bit, okay? And becomes very interested in Judaism and science. In 1971, he stops moving around between shuls and hillels, settles in Brooklyn, associate editor of Intercom, and becomes director of the NCSY publications, which is like the RCA, okay? And he writes and he gives shiurim. He translates Me'am Lo'ez from Ladino into Hebrew, something going into 18 volumes. He translates into English the whole of the Tanakh, Chumash called the Living Torah. He writes on Kabbalah, anything and everything, and makes it available to young people who are asking questions in the States in the 60s and in the 70s. In the early 80s, and he was an expert on Kabbalah, Halakha, you name it, Kaplan knew it. Collapsed and died of a heart attack in 1983 at the age of 48. Rabbi Pinchas Stolper has this to say about him. He saw harmony between science and Judaism where many others saw otherwise. He put forward creative and original ideas and hypotheses, all the time anchoring them in classical works of rabbinic literature. Someone to read from line 15. Michael, you are on and unmuted, so let's have a good Glasgow accent. Thus.
Right, here we go. Thus, according to Rabbi Isaac of Akko, the universe would be 42,000 times 365,250 years.
Because the 42,000 is the multiple of 7, okay?
Yes.
Of the 7,000, the 6,000 plus the year of desolation, 42,000. And then each year in God's eyes is 1,000 years. That's 42,000 times 360, because it's 365 and a quarter days in a year. So that comes out to be
15,340,500,000 years. Modern science has concluded that the Big Bang occurred approximately 15 billion years ago. Here we see the same figure presented in a Torah source written over 700 years ago.
If you know enough, you can put together a case for synthesizing the best of science with the best of Judaism. Read on, I'm sure.
I am sure that many will find this highly controversial. However, it is important to know that this opinion exists in our classical literature. Moreover, that one of the most important Kabbalists of 7 centuries ago,
that's Rabbi Yitzchak Dimin Akko,
calculated the age of the universe and came to the same conclusion as modern science.
Rabbi Yitzchak Dimin Akko's son was Rabbi Yitzchak the Blind, who was one of the seminal Kabbalists in medieval Europe. So here we have an amazing comment, typical of Kaplan, unfortunately, early death. Who knows what he would have produced. Now, we are out of time, and I've missed out Rav Kook, which is a pity, and also Kasuto. Wonderful ideas, but I think I can just tell you about them next time before we begin our prophecy section of the Moreh Nevukhim. Okay, so I'm now going to close the screen share, and well, anybody would like to make a comment, now is the time. As I said, this was simply an illustration of some of the views that occur within, I think, very respectable rabbinic Judaism about how to reconcile science, physical science, albeit not metaphysics. And Rav Kook again will also explain that such beliefs and ideas and acceptance of science are nothing to do with our faith. He says something very interesting, by the way. He says that all of this, of course, was available to God. He could have written in his Torah to us. He could have told us about the age of the universe, about fossils, about levels. He could have told us about laws, told us about gravity, he could have told us about Einstein. But what would we have understood in the 13th century before the Common Era? In other words, we have to learn this stuff, and we have to enrich the Torah, which is what God knows and gave us, with hints and clues as to be able to accommodate what's happening in our time. What we are doing is getting to the real truth behind the Torah. And I've now saved myself having to read Rav Kook. You can read it at home, but this is his main idea. He says very cutely, perhaps, had God told us that the earth was round in the Torah, people at that time would have been scared to have got up and moved because they would have thought they'd fall off the earth. You can only, it is like the Akedat Yitzchak says, you start a baby off drinking its mother's milk. If you try to feed a baby a black Angus steak, it wouldn't do very well. And so you have to have this type of historical perspective that Rav Kook was very keen on. And he puts scientific knowledge into that category too. And what Cassuto, who was a rabbi professor, of course, the Nazis threw him out of his professorship in Rome. So he came to Palestine, and he became the first professor of Bible at the Hebrew University. He was always a Rav professor, and he says that the beauty of the Torah is that it fights the pagan world. Pagan world at the time saw creation as a result of huge conflicts between massive sea monsters, roiling the whole ocean. These great cataclysmic struggles out of which pagans constructed their creation myths. We have a beautiful, simplistic line. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. And you know that Taninei hayam, Taninim gdolim are just part of a whole creation process, very quiet, very calm, day after day. And upon that, we can base interpretations that will enable us to understand, as I said, what science does tell us in the course of the development of humankind. And we haven't finished yet. There's no guarantee. But the Torah will always be there. Its underlying theology and approach to creation, says Rav Kook, that is what is important. What is important is to understand that we are people living in a world who are also responsible to God. That is the important point, that we owe the world to God, and we should manifest that in the way we live our life in accordance with the best of the Torah and Judaism. But we have to work hard to interpret. As it says, Asher bara Elohim la'asot. What do you mean la'asot? If bara Elohim, where's to do? We do because we are partners with God in his creation, and we have to move it on and apply the Torah to what goes on in our lives, and not bury our heads in the sand like ostriches and claim that fossils are a test of our faith, that we have to deny their existence in order to prove that we are good Orthodox Jews. Okay? So, are there any more questions or comments? Jean.
I would like to mention the book of Nathan Aviezer that was not quoted, and which is an interesting, up-to-date explanation.
Would you like to give us the title of the book? Nathan Aviezer. What's the full title of the book?
The name, I must look, I cannot answer.
Okay,
if you look Nathan Aviezer, you will
in Hebrew, or Nathan Aviezer in English, Orthodox scientist, wrote some interesting stuff indeed about, again, how we can live very comfortably.
7 days of creation or something like.
We can live very, very comfortably in terms of our science and our commitment to Jewish learning. There's also something called The Creation in the Light of Modern Science by Aaron Bath. Are you aware of that, Jean? Jack is. Aaron Barth.
Yes.
Another
not
very interesting book, okay, which is available in English, and it also does a very nice job of combining modern physics and cosmology and cosmogony with the traditional texts and our religious approach.
I have a problem, if I may ask. If God destroyed many worlds before ours, that means two things. First of all, it means that God changed his mind when he created the earlier worlds. He didn't like them, he changed his mind and created another world, which is something that we can't ascribe to God, that he changes his mind. The second problem that I have is, if he destroyed the worlds, did he destroy the planet Earth also? Or is the planet Earth something that is of the new ones? Because if he destroyed the planet, and this is new, then this would mean that whatever is buried in the world, like all the fossils, the dinosaurs, etc., this would be also new in that sense, and wouldn't be a remnant of the older worlds which he created and destroyed.
Excellent questions. Let's see if I can make short work of them. Number one, we have to interpret. In other words, Maimonides would say, of course, God doesn't change his mind, okay? But it's a bit like the Keshet, the rainbow, and the opening of the earth, and the manna, and Miriam's well. God had this in mind when he created, or when creation took place. Whatever took place, creation took place, as Rambam says, and God had in mind that they would be. And the Midrash is simply putting it in human terms. That's how Rambam would go about explaining this Midrash, which he doesn't cite, of course. That's not what the Rambam would do. But he would say, if you text him, that Boneh Olamot Umacharivan was actually inherent in the blueprint. From the very beginning, there would be several worlds coming along, okay? And rather than saying he didn't like them, it would say that the nature of the universe is to progress, to change and to progress. And this phrase, Boneh Olamot Umachrivan, is just to enable us, or in the past, to understand how it was possible. So the image is that, say, of a potter who's making clay pottery, doesn't like the particular pot, smashes it and starts again with a potter's wheel and makes a new pot. But that is only a mashal, as it were. The truth, the theological truth, would be that the pattern of emerging worlds, so the first world is modified, not completely destroyed. Okay, it's very seriously modified. And here I am actually citing a commentary that I'll try and track down for you, who interprets this midrash. There's quite a bit of scholarship about this midrash, Boneh Olamot Umachrivan, and also about the theory of Rabbi Yitzchak Temin Akko. So the world was built into this world from its very beginning is a process of change, which may in fact take place in the future. The world as we know it may be changed drastically from a physical point of view. And who knows, is climate change, if it is true, Melanie, going to influence this? Okay. Is this going to bring us into a different world in physical terms? I don't know. But it would fit in with this midrashic and Kabbalistic concept that the world is changing all the time, okay? And that God's plan, though, is for this change. And that's why we are seeing evidence of different worlds, of an early world of dinosaurs and birds and beasts that do not exist, or their descendants exist, a little elephant rather than a mammoth, okay? But this is the pattern that was set in, and Rav Kook also hints at this. Again, I don't have time because we have overshot. But nevertheless, the idea, Jack, I think, and I thank you for bringing this up. It's a very good question, and two questions, and I think that this is the answer. You've opened up a whole concept or world of ideas that we don't often go into in school or Jewish studies programs, because this is considered esoteric and not everybody has access to this. But they are definitely within the sources. I will try and send you a mail with some of the sources so that you can get to read them, okay? Beli neder and imitz Hashem.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Okay, that's it for this evening then. So everybody should have a great rest of Wednesday, a wonderful weekend, a nice Nitzavim Vayelech, and we will get together on Wednesday next in Itz Hashem, God willing, for prophecy. Bye for now.